Everybody, wait a minute.
Well, like organic vegan soul food from your immediate diet. That's healthy.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like.
Hey, what's up, good people? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here on Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball, very happy to be your host. Why is my mic sounding scratchy? Uh-oh, what's going on here? Okay, good. Yeah, I'm getting word. Are we getting some news today about this? And in my little test, I'm hearing, yeah, it does sound scratchy. That's what I thought. I don't know. Let's try something here. Does that make a difference? Did that change? I think it did change it on this end. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody. Apologies. Yes. A parole hearing in first parole hearing in a decade. So okay, that's that. I was not clear on that. So thanks for that. We will definitely keep our eyes and ears open. My texts have just started going crazy. So yeah, this is going to come up a little bit. In fact, so the other day, so I'm not going to have to be out of here in about an hour. So there was a couple things I thought I was going to do this morning, and then I thought I wasn't going to do it. Then I decided I would go ahead and do it because I was been up for hours looking at, first of all, catching up on the Big Cigar series. The finale is Friday. I'm all caught up. I was going to do something on that. I might even start this morning. That's where I was going to start. But then I had also been sent, subsequent to our last discussion with Daruba regarding United Fronts, a couple people had sent me a few things about some of the histories of United Fronts. And then also about, I was also sent this very long and fascinating story that we're going to look at a little bit, that I'll make sure I put the link to in the show. In fact, I need to put the links to both of these in the show description. So I'll do that as I'm setting this up. One of them was used as a thumbnail from New York Magazine in June of 1970, June 8th of 1970. So almost exactly 53 years ago. Right? Yeah. This story came out and was that centered on one of those gatherings at the Bernstein house, that because Daruba, okay, so Daruba talked about United Fronts, and he also mentioned Leonard Bernstein having done something for the Panther 21. So because our audience is so incomparable, I was sent a number of pieces related to those two stories, one of which is again the thumbnail, Radical Chic, the party at Lenny's from 53 years ago, and the other where I'd like to start first actually is this one, published on Verso Books blog from June of 2020. So interesting, titled Black Panthers United Front Against Fascism Conference. So in each case, people, I think, were lovingly and in a comradely way wanting to, and now both links are in the show description. So by the time you refresh, or if you're seeing this later, they will be there. You can read them for yourselves in their entirety. Both, the point of I think both people sending me these was that they wanted to raise some comradely criticism of the history and concept, and even the application of Daruba's current effort with a United Front. So when I catch up with him again, I will ask him we'll of course continue the discussion and invite him. But I thought these were very interesting, and I just had not read a lot about it. I've heard Daruba talk a lot about it, read things in passing probably over the years, but had never really focused on what actually happened with these United Front efforts. So here's at least some critical responses to that. So here's this piece from Verso, which, as it says here, the following account of the Black Panthers United Front Against Fascism conference appeared in the Old Mole, a paper of the Students for a Democratic Society that was widely read in radical circles in the Boston area. As has been noted elsewhere in this volume, in forming their own United Front in 1969, the Panthers resurrected analyses of the Communist Party USA, reaching out to personnel who were active during the Popular Front period. Interestingly, visible in this piece is how their fellow radicals subjected the Panthers to some of the same critiques leveled at the earlier Popular Front, namely that they watered down their previously revolutionary language and demands in the interest of overly broad coalition building. Following the conference, many whites of the New Left, while continuing to rhetorically support the Panthers as a vanguard, increasingly disdained the shift as reformist. So this was interesting, and it also is interesting in that I just was watching it and catching up that this issue does dovetail with one of the themes of the Big Cigar series, where part of the way that they reduce Huey's story, the reductionist view of Huey's story, is to make it almost an individual's struggle, personal struggle, and internal conflict, even dealing with the competing ideologies of or tactics of armed struggle and peaceful radical assimilation, as I wrote in my notes. But as I said here in this piece, so, the conference on July 19th, 1969 was overwhelmingly white. And they listened to a speech from Bobby Seale, who was warning against the creeping fascism and was encouraging for a united front against fascism that would involve sort of, well, as they say here, sort of a myopic view just on gaining community control of the police using legal, electoral, political strategies to do so. It says here, Seale was followed by Herbert Aptheker, who spoke to the historical aspects of the rising tide of fascism. This does sound wildly familiar. And as I read this, I thought, because they said, and this is no diss, but they said in this piece that Herbert Aptheker went on for a long time. He was boring. He lost the interest of the audience. There were people in there who were to his left who were critical of him. And it kind of reminded me of the conference I was just at in Brooklyn, where some in the audience felt that way about the centerpiece communist star of that moment, Richard Wolff, and who I would not at all suggest is boring as a speaker, but did not drone on apparently as long as Aptheker is accused of here, but was seen as being sort of that old white guy that was by some in the audience that was holding up the process. So I thought that was kind of interesting. They also make the point that that is again a perennial problem that still persists in many activist spaces. The so-called women's panel was sort of thrown together last minute, canceled, reinstituted, kind of thrown back in there, and not really given the center stage that it deserved. But the United Front Against Fascism program calls for the decentralization of police forces and community control with the right to hire police officers from within the community. This is to be accomplished by referendum campaigns organized by committees to combat fascism in Black, brown, and white communities. These committees are to initiate petition campaigns to educate and involve people around police control demand. Panther stressed that white as well as Black workers come under attack from fascist police and thus need to fight and control them. They explain the need for legal tactics as an educational necessity at this time. Many of the delegates left the conference confused and disappointed. The radical movement feared that the Panthers United Front tactic was attempting to enlist liberal support at the expense of revolutionary militancy. SDS supports Students for Democratic Society supports self-determination as community control in colonized Black and brown communities, but not in white communities where racism and white supremacy must be fought. So this was the SDS's critique of that broad-based plan as it was being rolled out by the Panthers at this time, saying that as they say here, we support completely the demand for community control of decentralized police in Black and brown communities and will help to build support for that demand in white neighborhoods. At the same time, we cannot support the demand for white community control, and we therefore urge local and regional SDS organizations to work within the national committees to combat fascism to change the wording of the petition. This will also be done on a national level. We urge that the SDS chapters undertake campaigns and around pig repression. So this was a relatively short piece, and it was just again arguing that the Panthers were softening their stance. And again, the link is in the show description. Please. And so I thought that was interesting, that it was just an interesting read. I had not read much about or remembered reading much at all about this history. So again, in response to that discussion with Dhoruba and his attempt to bring the campaigns of Claudia, Jill, and Cornel West together, Jill Stein and Cornel West together, there were some that were admittedly seeing contradictions in that, and thought that at least some reference to this history might be considered, so that any attempts today to build a united front would not be based on a sort of political softening towards liberalism, but something that would maintain an appropriate analysis and militancy. It's difficult to, it is, I admit, difficult for me to see how anything that would involve Dhoruba would be. But to the extent that, as this article this statement points out, that that if you spread too thin or you expand too broad the tent, so to speak, it might lead to a de-radicalizing effort. So I would like to see more about that. Definitely talk to Dhoruba and read more about that and in that specific history. I don't remember enough about the Panthers' histories and how they interpreted all of that. But and in my mind, I am being impacted by having just binged the Big Cigar's first 5 of 6 episodes. Where this issue is brought up, but in a slightly different way. So I'll come back and talk about that. Maybe we'll get, I don't know, maybe we could do that today. Just knock that out a little bit, put this all together. So the other one, and this was a very long story, and it was fascinating. Tom Wolfe's The Radical Chic, that party at Lenny's, it's a tricky business integrating new politics with tried and true social motifs, by Tom Wolfe, from June of the original was from June 8th, 1970. And it's about so the title calls it a party, but if you read the story, Burns, and this is also controversial, I keep saying Bernstein, I think many of us say Bernstein, but Bernstein is adamant that it was not a party, it was a meeting, and that it was meant to educate and inform people about what the Panthers were dealing with in the Panther 21 trial and to raise funds for their defense. And so on the one hand, I want to be clear, I don't want to conflate a critique of a united front with what happens in this party, Although in my mind, I admit I am doing a little bit of that because I see so much of an overlap between celebrity white liberals and efforts to and efforts among those who are trying to build a revolution are compelled to engage these groups, if for no other reasons, for resources. And again, this is a big theme of the big cigar, which is again floating around in the back of my mind while I'm consuming all of this as well. So all right, again, the link is in the show description because we're not going to do the whole story justice. But as I was saying, Bernstein in this story makes a very okay, real quick. So I watched that Bradley Cooper movie. I'm tempted to go back and watch it again because on the one hand, I don't remember any of these issues coming up at all, but I didn't watch the film very closely. I wasn't looking to be discussing it or critical of it, or I just was curious after reading a review or two about it, and particularly what was said about the prosthetic nose Bradley Cooper wore. I just kind of wanted to see what they did with this. But in this article, one of the things that Bernstein apparently was struggling with was this desire to be separate from the groups of Jews that would come over here and assimilate by changing their name to Stein, or rather to Steen. So apparently Steen was seen as an attempt to assimilate, and Stein was the original, more authentically, I don't know, German Jewish name. Yeah, Bradley Cooper's movie where he played Leonard Bernstein. But in this article, Leonard was big on making it clear, I want to be called Bernstein because I don't want to be confused with the Bernsteins and the Steens of the world who changed their name to assimilate. He wanted his Jewishness to be known. Which I admit resonates a little bit with me because that was actually an issue with my mother and some elements of her own family, that she was big on, like, what are you changing your name? So that's also wild. Like, I didn't realize until early this morning in reading about the big cigar, I didn't know that Frederica Newton's mother was also a Jew. I didn't realize that. So this was it's been a fascinating 6 to 8 hours overnight in over here. So all right, so that was one thing. The other thing was, of course, this meeting is never mentioned in the film, nor I don't remember any even allusions being made in the film to Stein's politics, his struggles with assimilationist Jews, his struggle with the civil rights movement, his struggles around Israel. I don't remember that coming up in the movie at all. It seemed exclusively focused on his relationship with his wife and their careers and his music and his conducting. And I just didn't, but again, maybe I fell asleep. Maybe it was a blip. I don't really know. So that part, those two threads that are brought up in this story, I thought were fascinating, that are just not dealt with. So the short of it is that this article talks about what they call radical chic, which is this idea that elite white socialites, particularly in New York, but elsewhere, want to, again, this dovetails so perfectly with the big cigar. They want to involve themselves in at least the aesthetics of revolution, and are happy to, in this case, throw parties, meetings, fundraisers for Black radicals and all forms of radical. So actually what this article talks about is that what the Panthers fell into in terms of being brought into the world of radical chic had been going on for decades. where the wealthy socialite elite like to play with radical politics by inviting and hosting and fundraising and doing all of these things. But also, I think, revealing themselves and what their politics actually are. So this was so as Wolf writes here, this is a first for me, but talking about one of the socialites, Sherry Dushin. I don't know who these folks are, but she is not alone in her thrill as the Black Panthers come trucking into Lenny's house. Robert Bay, Don Cox, the Panthers field marshal from Oakland, Henry Miller, the Harlem Panther defense captain, the Panther women. Christ, if the Panthers don't know how to get it all together, they, as they say, the tight pants, the tight black turtlenecks, the leather coats, Cuban shades, afros, but real afros, not the ones that have been shaped and trimmed like a topiary hedge, and sprayed until they have been the sheen like acrylic wall to wall, but like funky, natural, scraggly, wild. I should have highlighted that too. That is wild. These are real men. There's all the psychosocial, sexual, whatever. There's a lot of that seems to be in this piece. There's a lot of allusion, you know, whether it's allusions to the tightness of the clothing, to the style, to there's like it is that radical chic, the desire to be around the rough and rugged sexual mandingo and mandingas, I guess. But so again, I said this is a very long. I'm just going to skip ahead to a couple of parts here because they talk about some of the backs and forths, and they get into this thing where, so part of it is this whole thing about Bernstein and dreams and his insomnia and some play that's happening in his mind's eye where this I'm calling it in here is just a Negro, but I'm saying a magical Negro appears, but not really to from behind Bernstein's piano to chastise it. I mean, it's there's a lot happening in this very long story here. But just to pull out a few key points here. Cox is invited to stand up and to speak, and you're picturing this gathering in this ornate sort of big penthouse, New York penthouse living room with pianos and couches and oh, now I'm Tume's. Is it Tume in the chat too? Because he's texted me stuff about. There's going to be more on this apparently about Bernstein. I'm going to get, but and Bernstein is sitting in this. They describe it kind of like sunken, leaning back into a couch, but calling out to the crowd and at one point where Cox is standing and talking, they describe Bernstein as sort of tucked in behind his leg. It's kind of this weird, like he's just sitting there leading it, but I don't know. It almost felt a little bit sexualized. But anyway, so Cox is invited to stand up and explain who the party is, and he, as it says here, he doesn't come on with street epithets and interjections and the rest of the rhetoric and red eyes used for mowing the white liberals, as it's called. He just goes into the 10-point program of the party, and starts explaining how they arrived at their conclusions, why they call them pigs. He makes reference, as he does here, to Huey Newton's and unarmed people are slaves or are slaves in the real meaning of the word. Any unarmed people are slaves or are slaves in the real meaning of the word. So they just laying out the basics of the Panthers approach. Of course, they're there to raise funds for the 21 defense. I'm just skipping ahead. So the highlighter on the other browser I was using didn't save. So, but so okay. All of this, including there's a lot of history in here again about the traditions of radical chic. So Radical Chic was already in full swing by the time the Black Panther Party began a national fundraising campaign in late 1969. The Panthers organizers, the great workers, counted on the Cause Party, to use a term that was current 35 years ago, meaning in the 30s and 40s, not merely in order to raise money. The Panther status was quite confused in the minds of many liberals, and to have the Panthers feted in the homes of series of social and cultural leaders could make an important difference. Ideally, it could work out well for the socialites and culturati too. If there was ever a group that embodied the romance and excitement of which Radical Chic is made, it was the Panthers. Even before the Bernstein's parties for the Panthers, there had been at least 3 others. John Simon of Random House, Hudson Street, Richard Barron, the publisher in Chappaqua, the Sidney and Gail Lament in their townhouse in Lexington Avenue. It was the Laments Party, which had led directly to the Bernsteins. A veteran cause organizer named Hannah Weinstein called up Gail Lament. She said that Murray Kempton had asked her to try to organize a party for the Black Panthers to raise money for the defense of the 21. The party was a curious one, even by the standards of Radical Chic. Many of the guests appeared not to be particularly social. The white guests and a few academic-looking blacks were packed sitting and standing into the living room. Then a contingent of 12 or 13 Panthers arrived. The Panthers had no choice but to assemble in the dining room and stand up in their leather pieces, afro, shades, facing the whites in the living room. As a result, whenever anyone got up in the living room to speak, the audience was looking not only at the speaker, but into the faces of a hard front of line of Black Panthers in the dining room. Quite a tableau it was. It was at this point that a Park Avenue matron first articulated the great recurrent emotion of Radical Chic. These are no civil rights Negroes wearing gray suits 3 sizes too big. These are real men. So again, I'm thinking, we're talking with Ori again on Saturdays with Renee, and Orasami Burton is talking about in Tip of the Spear, that very difficult chapter on the gender war, where a lot of it has to do with particularly white men, white male patriarchal views of sex, sexuality, manhood, and womanhood. And it was a hypersexualizing of blackness in particular. So this just read is very wild. Then at one point, Ray Messiah Hewitt starts to speak, and they feel like he goes in a little bit too much. That motherfucker Nixon, and being a little less diplomatic, but as they say, but as Wolf says here, but more than one Park Avenue matron was thrown into a Radical Chic confusion. The most memorable quote was, "He's a magnificent man, but suppose some simple-minded schmucks take all that business about burning down buildings seriously," which for me was the bar of bars for this piece, and situates what Wolf is ultimately saying about this, that I think he's ultimately saying about this Radical Chic community. And I often think about white liberals in general, and the way their politics are carried through pop culture, how they approach these politics. And it's a theme of the Big Cigar as well. Whites wanting to solve their own internal contradictions and struggles and personalities and conflicts with family by engaging, in this case, Black revolution, but only up to a point. So they want the 10-point programs. It's kind of like what was happening, and even what white revolutionaries were being critical of that initial attempt, according to that Verso piece, with the Black Panther efforts at a united front against fascism, that we're good with everything up until really you break with the Democratic Party. We could say that it's in today's language, we could say easily, once you start talking about armed struggle and a revolutionary violence, that's gone too far. But really, it's once you break left of the Democratic Party, that's really where I think the line ultimately is drawn. But But that line right there, she's saying, I like all of this, but he doesn't really mean all of that. And all at once, the candid voice of Radical Chic just ringing out like that seems about to drop Don Cox, Field Marshal of the Black Panthers, in his tracks by Lenny's grand piano. He just stares at Fagin, the Yale-style blonde in the tuxedo that's one of the guests. And from the front, from that moment on, the evening begins to take on a weird reversal. Rather than Cox becoming in the role of the black militant, mowing the rich white liberals, he is slowly backed into a weird corner. Afro, goatee, turtleneck, and all. He has to be the diplomat. He has to play that all-time loser role of the house guest trying to deal with a bunch of leaping, prancing, pulseed, happy slobber Saint Bernards. It's a ball breaker, and no wonder, for that man in all history has ever be for what man in all history has ever before come face to face with naked white radical chic running ecstatically through a Park Avenue duplex and letting it all hang out. In other words, once Masai got up and said what he said and went a little bit too far for the party, Hewitt was intense, powerful young man in no mood to play with the diplomacy game. Some of you are here, he said, may have some feelings left for the establishment, but we don't. We want to see it die. We're Maoist revolutionaries, and we have no choice but to fight to the finish. For about 30 minutes, Masai Hewitt laid it on the line. He referred now and again to that motherfucker Nixon and how this struggle would not be easy. And if that buildings were burned and other violence ensued, that was only part of the struggle, that the power structure had forced the oppressed minorities into. Nah. So I guess in my head, I'm conflating a lot of this, maybe, and that's, again, all the links are there. So please, I'm happy, of course, to be checked. But so I don't want to conflate the radical chic white liberals with an actual white left. I also don't want to deny that an actual white left falls into some of this. I also don't want to deny that black revolutionaries fall into sometimes the cosplay of tough talk. But I am seeing the contradiction, the paralleling contradictions of trying to build a revolution from within an internal colony, trying to compete with popularizing your struggle, but controlling that message, getting resources from pockets of society where they're available. And who wouldn't, I don't know who, I'm just thinking of myself. I'll speak for myself. I would absolutely want somebody to go to Leonard Bernstein's house for a meeting or a party to raise money for me if I was locked up or facing being locked up. So to be reminded with this kind of clarity as to why the white folks are doing this, why this particular class of white folks are doing this. It does speak to what I think that group that is that parallel part of that group that's in Hollywood or like spaces would give us big cigars and Fred Hampton films and things like that, because that's the level at which they would want to engage the revolution. That's the radical chic of today. We're raising awareness, potentially money for your causes, even if we have to do it in a way that makes us comfortable. Yeah. So what ends up happening with this party / meeting is that Bernstein feels like he has done something good. He and his wife feel like they've done something good. Well, I'll get to that. Okay, let me not skip this part. So this is one of the exchanges that occurs in the party where Bernstein and other guests want to question the Panther spokespeople as to what is the relationship with these politics and within. And Bernstein keeps wanting to ask, as he says here, Don, what's really worrying a lot of us here is the friction between groups like the Black Panthers and the established Black community. a lot of us, he says, are worried about things like threats against the lives of leaders in the established Black community. And Don Cox and the Panthers are trying to explain maybe the Revolutionary Action Movement had been involved with some threats at one point, but we don't threaten other Black leaders. We're not involved with doing that. But what Bernstein and others are really clearly trying to do is to try to say, we want to support you, but we want to make sure that we're not going against our preferred form of Black leadership. And while we may be enthralled with your style and your look and your sexuality and your rawness, we are not really comfortable with those politics, and just want to make sure that we're not upsetting, like, for instance, Bayard Rustin, who was supposed to have been there tonight, but he isn't here for an important reason. The reason he isn't here is that he was worried that his life would be in danger, and that's what I want to know about. Now, did Rustin think his life was in danger from the Panthers? Would he have had cause to ever think that? Seems on the surface unlikely, but at the same time, you never know. A lot of wild stuff was going on, but the reality is that is, especially as we're seeing today, Rustin is the preferred form of Black radicalism or Blackness that an establishment and a white liberal radical chic community would want to promote. So Lenny breaks in response to something Donald Cox had said about criticizing capitalism. Well, when you say capitalist, is that the pejorative tone? It reminds me of Stokely. When you read Stokely's statement in the New York Review of Books, there's only one place where he says what he really means, and that's way down in paragraph 28 or something, and you realize he is talking about setting up a socialist government. In other words, do you really want that? Julie Belafonte was at this party too, by the way. I think she just passed a few months ago, right? There's this back and forth with Otto Preminger, and it's just one of these classic backs and forth where it's an attempt, and I'm sure many people watching this have been in a version of this, where someone, and they may not even be white, but someone will want to challenge your politics with by basically suggesting that this country isn't as bad as it is, that capitalism isn't as bad as it is. Where would you go for something better? You can't possibly really want socialism. You can't possibly really want to get to socialism through some sort of beyond the Democratic Party means. It's just one of those kinds of exchanges where you can kind of see where the radical chic is pushed to its limits. And the radical chic in this case, I think by today would include would be a little more diverse than it was at this time. And then they kind of get to this point. Wolf kind of exposes, I think, one of the points made that one of the guests says something to the effect that they can understand a little bit of what's going on with the Panthers because most of the people in this room have had a problem about being unwanted, was the phrase. So Wolf comes back to that. And that's sort of the thing, like, so because I wasn't really wanted in my sort of white upper middle class background, I can use that to identify with the struggle of an eternally colonized Black population and struggle for freedom. Most people in this room have had a problem being unwanted. There it is. It's an odd feeling. Most of the people in this room's heads have just spun out over this one. Lenny is unbeatable. Mental Giotto at 3 a.m. He has done it. He has just steered the Black Panther movement into a 1955 Jules Feiffer cartoon. Sorry, that was Bernstein that made that remark. Because he goes into this whole thing, the paradoxical situation of he says so, you know, to Don Cox, do you really not want people to have apartments like this? Because if we don't have apartments like this, then we can't host you. But then if we don't have apartments like this, maybe there's no need to host you. But in the end, most of us in this room have had a problem at one point or another with being unwanted. So what Wolf is saying is that Bernstein used that moment in his apparently very talkative, interrupting way social in a very sociable way to redirect the focus of into a Jules Pfeiffer cartoon. I tried to look up Jules Pfeiffer because I didn't really get the reference, but I took it to mean that he walked the problems of the Panthers into a very safe, more popular space. Rejection, security, anxiety, Oedipus, Electra, neurosis, transference, id, superego, archetype, the field of perception, the wonderful 1950s game, beloved by all educated young men and women in the East who grew up in an era of great cresting tide of Freud, Jung, Adler, Reich, when everyone either had an analyst or quoted Ernst Dichter telling Maytag that dishwashing machines were bought by women with anal compulsions. And in the gathering insulin coma, Lenny has the Panthers and 75 assorted celebrities and culturati heading off on a long march into a neural jungle. 1955 forever. One way or another, we all feel insecure, right? And so long as we repress it's marvelous. More Mr. Auricularis, the village explainer. The most of the people in this room have had a problem about being unwanted. So it's like it seems to connect everybody into this. When they ask you about the way you refer to capitalism is whether you see a chance at all for peace. So again, this question of peace comes up, and this issue of, if you're criticizing capitalism, you're criticizing us. And when you say you're willing to become violent, what about us? What about our children? And this is actually Barbara Walters doing the questioning here. She was at this gathering. And she's saying, but my husband is a capitalist. I work in news media. In other words, I benefit from this system. I love this system. And if you're going to attack this system, even while I feel sort of an empathy of sorts for you, what are you really saying about us? And what about our children? And again, there's logic in that. But of course, and that would be, of course, why they would want, consciously or not, to be involved in funding, supporting, hosting, representing, and then certainly in today's media environment, projecting and presenting, representing these histories and these movements in a way that doesn't make them too uncomfortable. I also thought it was interesting that Cox was pointing out back then that 750 families have all the wealth in this country. And we just, again, got that report where 737 people or families in this country are worth $5.5 trillion. So Barbara Walters says, I'm talking about what's supposed to happen to other people if you achieve your goals. I'm talking as a white woman who has a white husband who is a capitalist or an agent of capitalists, and I am too. And I want to know, if you have your freedom, does that mean we have to go? Cox says, for one person to be free, everyone has to be free. As long as the whole class is oppressed, there's no freedom in society. A lot of young white people are beginning, and then he gets interrupted. They keep going back and forth. And then Preminger tries to ask, is it right for a Jew to leave Russia and settle in Israel? If you're for freedom, says Preminger, tell me this: is it right for a Jew to leave Russia and settle in Israel? Let me finish, Cox says. Is it right for a Jew to leave Russia and to settle in Israel? Most people in the room don't know what the hell Preminger is driving at, but Leon Quat and the little gray man know right away. They're trying to wedge into the argument that the hell with the little number, that Israel and Al-Fatah and UAR and MiGs and Russia and USSR and Zionist imperialist number, not in this room, you don't. Which leads to where, all right, so that issue will come back that in just a minute. So again, Bernstein and his wife think they've done a good thing. They've hosted this gathering. They've raised some money. They've satisfied their radical chic egos and desires. But then apparently a New York Times editorial is printed later that week, a false note on the Panthers criticizing this gathering, emergence of the Black Panthers as the romanticized darlings of the political cultural jet set is an affront to the majority of Black Americans. This so-called party, with its confusion of Mao, Marxist ideology, and fascist paramilitarism, is fully entitled to protection of its members' constitutional rights. It was to make sure that those rights are not abridged by persecution masquerading as law enforcement that Committee of Distinguished Citizens has recently formed a group headed by Arthur Goldberg that sought to investigate the killing of Fred Hampton by Chicago police. In contrast, the group Therapy Plus fundraising soiree at the home of Leonard Bernstein, as reported in this newspaper yesterday, represents a sort of elegant slumming that degrades patrons and patronized alike. It might be dismissed as guilt-relieving fun spiked with social consciousness, except for the impact on those Blacks and whites seriously working for complete equality and social justice. It mocked the memory of Martin Luther King Jr., whose birthday was solemnly observed throughout the nation yesterday. So Bernstein starts to, it's sort of, there's like a backlash against their efforts, and Felicia Bernstein responds, and there was something that was written where they were in the critique, where they said, "We shall soon witness the birth of local Rent-a-Panther organizations." Wow. This fed the conspiracy theory, at least at Bernstein, in the Bernstein household. They felt attacked, and they felt like they were being set up. And then it got worse, because if the Bernsteins thought their main problem at this point was bad press, they were wrong. A controversy they were apparently oblivious of suddenly erupted around them, namely the bitterness between Jews and Blacks over an issue that had been building over 3 years, ever since Black Power became important. The first inkling of the Bernsteins had was when they started getting hate mail, some of it apparently from Jews of the Queens Brooklyn Jewish Defense League variety. Then the league's national chairman, Rabbi Meir Kahane, blasted Lenny publicly for joining a trend in liberal and intellectual circles to lionize the Black Panthers. I would have loved if this had been in that movie. If any of this had been in that movie. This dude, this terrorist thug, going at Leonard Bernstein over his alleged support or whatever support of the Panthers. One of the ironies of the history of Jews in America was their long championship of Black civil liberties had begun to backfire so badly in the 1960s. As Seymour Lipset has put it, the integrationist movement was largely an alliance between Negroes and Jews, who to a considerable extent actually dominated it. Many of the interracial civil, I'm fascinated that they said that. Many of the interracial civil rights organizations have been led and financed by whites, and the majority of their white members have been Jews. Insofar as a Negro effort emerged to break loose from the involvement with whites from domination of the civil rights struggle by white liberals, it meant concretely a break with Jews. For there were whites who were active in these movements. The Black nationalist leadership had to push whites, Jews out of the way, and to stop white Jewish interference in order to get whites, Jews off their backs. I thought this was fascinating. I think that is from Seymour Lipset, who I've never heard of before, but I think that's a fascinating summary. I don't find it terribly inaccurate either. And I would have loved to see that brought up in Bradley Cooper's film. Meanwhile, Black power groups such as SNCC and the Black Panthers were voicing support for Arabs against Israel. This sometimes looked like a mere matter of Black nationalism. After all, Egypt was part of Africa. Hold on a second. After all, Egypt was part of Africa.
Message.
And Black nationalist literature sometimes seemed to identify the Arabs as Blacks fighting with the white Israelis, or else it looked like merely a commitment to world socialism. The Soviet Union and China supported the Arabs against the imperialist tools, the Israelis. But many Jewish leaders regarded the anti-Zionist stances of groups like the Panthers as a veiled American brand anti-Semitism tied up with such less theoretical matters as extortion, robbery, and mayhem by blacks against Jews in ghetto areas. Now that's fascinating. The idea that black people were extorting and robbing Jews in the ghettos, that's wild. Yeah, I actually tried to find this issue, the June 1967 issue of the Panther publication Black Power carried a poem entitled Jewland, which I feel like if I read it, YouTube will kick us off. But I couldn't find it, and I'm if anybody knows where this can be found or has a link, I'd be interested in seeing what the publication was and more of the context. To other people involved in radical chic, however, the picture was now becoming clear as day. This was no time for a Custer's last stand. This was time to panic. Two more couples had already agreed to give parties for Panthers, Peter, Sheree Dushin, and Frank Adoma Stanton. They had already gotten static themselves. And then long story short, the parties start getting canceled. The times and relationships start fracturing. Once the Israel, Zionism, anti-Semitism all get put on the table, the ties start to come apart. The times because once Israel is considered part of a settler colonial, then all of a sudden the contradictions for some become too much. The Times was pushing its own pet organizations, the NAACP, the Urban League, the Urban Coalition, and so on. Why did it look like the Times always tried to punish prominent Jews who refused to lie down and play good, solid burgers? Who was it who said the Times was, I love this line, who was it who said the Times was a Catholic newspaper run by Jews to fool Protestants? And I got what was I just reading? There was speaking of that, what was I just looking at? Oh, in this book that I'm still, this book is fantastic. Selling Free Enterprise. There's a whole section in there about how the business community after the Second World War wanted to use religion to promote capitalism. And there's a brief section or mention of what I don't think I've ever really paid attention to, that there was a real, and it makes sense. There's a real class division between Catholics and Protestants. Never mind the religious one. The class Catholics are much more working class. That's the method of colonization, more so than Protestantism. And the Protestants, like WASPs, obviously, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, have all the money and political power and can oddly hide that fact by blaming Jews while convincing many other Black Christians and Muslims of that conspiracy. It's fascinating. It's a little slick. All of a sudden, the WASPs disappear with all the money, political power, and manufacturing capability, military control, but are somehow powerless to that cabal of Jews. Is wild. Anyway, just wrapping up here. Lenny couldn't get over the whole affair. Earlier the evening, he had talked to a reporter and told him it was nauseating. The so-called party for Panthers had not been a party. It had been a meeting. There was nothing social, he said. It was about raising money for legal defense. It wasn't about getting all into this other thing with these other politics. And then the panic, as it says here, turned out to be good for the friends of the, I love this line. So the point is, the panic occurred among the radical chic, the elite white liberals, who saw, once confronted with true revolutionary politics and tactics, said, we're out of here, and panicked and ran, took their money and ran. The panic turned out to be good for Friends of the Earth, somewhat the way the recession has been bad for the Four Seasons, but good for Rikers. I have to give Wolf credit. I like that line. Because white liberals ran off to save the earth and save the whales and save the environment. Not that that doesn't need saving, but it seemed like a convenient way of getting away from these black lunatics and actual, anti-capitalist, anti-colonial struggle, which, had they followed that, would have ultimately been more of a saving grace for the earth. But, in the same ways that when there's a recession, people are less likely to be at the Four Seasons Hotel, but Rikers Island is damn sure going to have an uptick in support. I like that line. Many matrons such as Sheree Dushin turned their attention towards sables, cheetahs, and leopards once the Panthers became radioactive. That's a little barish too. It's a little barish. That's a little barish.
Now listen.
It's just a little barish. Let's save the animals because these real life Panthers, that's too much. Richard Fagan dropped his plans for a party because of Panthers' support of Al Fatah. Leonard Bernstein went off to England to rehearse with the London Symphony Orchestra for an already scheduled performance at the Royal Albert Hall. That I seem to remember being in the movie. Miami Jewish pickets forced a movie house to withdraw a film of Lenny conducting the Israel Philharmonic on Mount Scopus in celebration of Israel's victory in the Six-Day War. So I'm assuming they said if you're going to support Panthers, you can't then be seen as being supportive of Israel, because he did go and perform. But he ran afoul of the Jewish community because he seemed to be supporting these anti-Semites. The radically chic made a strategic withdrawal denouncing the witch hunt of the press as they went. Radical chic, after all, is only radical in style, in its heart, and is part of society and its traditions. Politics, like rock, pop, and camp, has its uses, but to put one's whole status on the line for the nostalgia de la boule, I don't know, the back in the day, I guess, I don't know, something like that. I don't know what that is. In any of its forms would be unprincipled. Meanwhile, the damnable press dogged Lenny even in London. A United Press International reporter interviewed him there and sent out a story in which Lenny said the Panthers are a bad lot. Lenny denied that. If we deny these Black Panthers their democratic rights because their philosophy is unacceptable to us, then we are denying our own democracy. Sounds good, right? But he now made clear that he was opposed to their philosophy, however. Continuing, it is not easy to discern a consistent political philosophy among the Black Panthers, but it is reasonably clear that they are advocating violence against their fellow citizens, the downfall of Israel, the support for Al Fatah, and other similarly dangerous and ill-conceived pursuits. To all of these concepts, I am vigorously opposed and will fight against them as hard as I can. And then he gets booed. And that's, you would have to read the whole article for this line to make sense here. This black apparition, the damnable Negro by the piano, but it's almost like Wolf is using a black man to be the shadow, Jung's shadow, Stein's shadow. All right, so that was it. Maybe I'll wait to watch the final or the finale on Friday to Big Cigar. This has been a little bit of a busy time, so I'm behind on a few things. And sort of taking a little bit of a break and a vacation, but we've had big time graduations. My oldest, big party Saturday. That was great. Then we had my 20th anniversary last week. So it's been a little bit busy and fun with the family. And some, be around here slightly less over the next few weeks, but definitely back on Friday, definitely back on Saturday. And maybe sometime in there, we'll get to the Big Cigar. Maybe I'll ask iMWiL crew to, I don't know, we'll see. But yeah, just real quick. Africa wrote a lot of good things. I mean, I still have his whole collection of what was it called? That whole series. I now forget the Black History. I think it's called Negro History Series or something like that. What is it? I can't remember. I used to read a lot of Aptheker. Yeah, enjoy life. Congrats. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah. So, but I just thought those articles are fascinating, and if you get a chance, definitely read them. They're linked in the show description. Just raising, I think, interesting concerns and criticism about the various ways people align or don't align. Yeah, Diallo ain't gonna watch all that, so I'll just come back and deal with that, because there's a lot in there, and it's a bit of a challenge. It's another challenge. But the good news is apparently nobody else is watching it. Thank you very much. Yes, the fam looks good in those pictures for sure. Absolutely. And yeah, Mtume, I'm gonna get to some of these other pieces that you sent, or at least this one here in Dissent magazine. Leonard Bernstein's radicalism. Bernstein uses his status as a public figure to both popularize classical music and support civil rights, the anti-war movement, and other political issues. So I don't know to what extent they will get into what this article did. In fact, I don't see I'm just doing a quick. Okay, so it does mention political activist similarly sees a backdrop. Many people familiar with the fundraising party his wife held for Black Panthers department, even an event journalist Tom Wolfe covered in a long, derisive article that we just covered. Bernstein's political activity is similarly seen only as a backdrop for the interpersonal drama of Maestro. So that's right. So Dissent so I was right. I didn't get that part wrong. But I don't even remember that being mentioned in the film. And I think that would have been, obviously, would have been great to see that. Yeah, I'm not advocating the big cigar. Please don't get me wrong. I just wanted to push through and finish just for the sake of finishing. Oh, wow. And I also just got Double O African Community. So, and earlier this year in February, Charlie Biton, co-founder of Israeli Black Panther Party, is co-founder of Israeli Black Panthers and first Israeli to meet Arafat, dies at 76. Oh, wow. That was in February. It's fascinating. Yeah, anyway, no, there was yeah, so the Maestro film didn't mention much of this at all, but I thought that I mean, depicting that party as a scene, I think would have been fascinating to have. You have all these apparently famous people. You got the Panthers in there, the controversy but then you got to deal with all those politics. They don't want to deal with all of that. So, all right. Thanks, everybody, for coming through. I appreciate those who are here live, those who will see and hear this later. Thanks to you as well. Of course, as Fred Hampton used to say, peace only if you're willing to fight for it. And please do like, share, subscribe, support our Patreon. We're let's see, 27 more days, I think. 27 more days that we have to wander through this demonetized wilderness in YouTube. So if you can, support us on Patreon. And thank you all very much. See you next time. Not exactly sure when, so make sure you have the bell rung for that too. Make sure you catch up with Sundays and all the other, whatever you might have missed over the weekend. Warrior Class, Saturdays with Renee. And I'll see you next time right here.
I mix what I like. I mix what I like is exactly where you want and need to be. I mix what I like, organic, vegan, soul food from your immediate diet. That's healthy. I mix what I like.